drew nearer, they seemed less truly reptilian, only the flat head and the green slimy, frog-like skin carrying out the idea. They walked erect on their odd, thick stumps, and their suction discs made curious noises in the mud.
You're listening to Tales from the Witch House, and this is episode 4, and we are covering In the Walls of Eryx by H.P. Lovecraft. The story starts off in the form of diary entries, which we know Lovecraft likes to use. The protagonist's name is Steinfeld, and he works for a crystal company called Terra Nova, and he has landed on Venus, which is very thick, jungle-y atmosphere. It's a tough and grueling environment, and the narrator is displeased with his equipment and acts like he knows exactly what equipment would be better and is a real snob about it. It reminds me of the protagonist from The Temple. If you read that one, he has a similar personality. He is using a crystal detector to search for stones because they have power that can be used as a power source for the cities on Earth. However, the inhabitants of Venus, the man lizards, as he calls them, worship the crystals and place them in temples and on edifices. The narrator has an obvious distaste for the native species that goes so far as to suggest killing them all in sight of avoiding or risking being killed by them.
Possibly, they think we are just as foolish for coming to Venus to hunt the stuff as we think they are for groveling in the mud whenever they see a piece of it, or for keeping that great mass on a pedestal in their temple. I wish they'd get a new religion, but they have no use for the crystals except to pray to. Bearing theology, they would let us take all we want, and even if they learned to tap them for power, there'd be more than enough for their planet and the Earth besides. I, for one, am tired of passing up the main deposits and merely seeking separate crystals out of jungle riverbeds. Sometime, I'll urge the wiping out of these scaly beggars by a good stiff army from home. About 20 ships could bring enough troops across to turn the trick. One can't call the damn things men for all their cities and towers. They haven't any skill except building and using swords and poison darts, and I don't believe their so-called cities mean much more than anthills or beaver dams. I doubt if they even have a real language. All the talk about psychological communication through those tentacles down their chests strikes me as a bunk. What misleads people is their upright posture, just an accidental physical resemblance to terrestrial man.
It is important to note that the lizard people were friendly to humans until they started taking the crystals, in which case they attacked and killed them, but even still will only attack once the crystals are in danger of being taken. They have some form of connection to the crystals, though their cities and weapons are primitive. They use blowtarts and swords, are really tall, and communicate with each other through tentacles. The protagonist is out looking for crystals when he sees a few of the man lizards, and just straight up fries these guys with a flame pistol. No hesitation when it comes to using violence. His distaste for the creatures is evident in his personality, though we see the same thing when he mentions the other lesser creatures that live on Venus.
It is curious, though, how they've come to be dominant on the planet. Not another living thing higher than the wriggling acmens and scoras or the flying tucas of the other continent. Unless, of course, those holes in the Dianean Plateau hide something.
I really like that last line because it brings a sense of unknown dread, like being in a deep body of water, which is really fitting for an alien planet. He keeps walking through the jungle even though the terrain is really rough going and it's muddy. He has a run-in with a plant that causes hallucinations, and he isn't sure what's going on until he remembers that a friend of his named Bailey told him about a plant that expels gases that cause you to hallucinate. He sees crazy trippy stuff, light pulsing, bright colors, like a mushroom trip, I guess. He just tries to back away and hope to get out of the reach of the fumes and wait for it to pass. He tries to head in the direction of the crystals he had been working towards, hacking at jungle and just tripping. It gradually fades away, and he finds that only about half an hour has passed, though to him it felt like hours. About 5 p.m., he climbs a plateau and sees a forest in the distance, and he knows it has previously been named Eryx, or the Eryxian Highland. He can also see a sort of glow, and he knows from his detector that this must be where the crystal is, so he starts running towards it so it doesn't get taken before he can get there. As he is running, he is knocked hard off his feet, but he doesn't see anything around him. He soon realizes he has hit an invisible structure or some form of invisible wall. It is solid and makes a sound similar to steel or concrete when he hits it with his knife. The texture is also glassy and smooth to the touch, but completely imperceptible.
I was racing ahead with mounting eagerness, and had come within 100 yards or so of the crystal, whose position on a sort of raised place in the omnipresent slime seemed very odd, when a sudden, overpowering force struck my chest and the knuckles of my clenched fists and knocked me over backwards into the mud. The splash of my fall was terrific, nor did the softness of the ground and the presence of some slimy weeds and creepers save my head from a bewildering jarring. For a moment I lay supine, too utterly startled to think.
He starts to investigate the wall, and even though it's completely imperceptible, he follows a bit in both directions using his hands and can feel that it's curving, it's not straight. He can't reach the top of it, so he decides to throw mud up to see how tall it is, and estimates it's about 20 feet tall and has an open top. There seems to be no end to it in either direction, left or right. He follows the wall and attempts to get closer to the crystal, and as he does, he sees something shocking.
I have said that even from a greater distance the shining object's position seemed queer, on a slight mound rising from the slime. Now, at about 100 yards, I could see plainly despite the engulfing mist just what the mound was. It was the body of a man in one of the Crystal Company's leather suits, lying on his back and with his oxygen mask half buried in the mud a few inches away. In his right hand, crushed convulsively against his chest, was the crystal which had led me here, a spheroid of incredible size, so large that the dead fingers could scarcely close over it. Even at the given distance, I could see that the body was a recent one. There was little visible decay, and I reflected that in this climate, such a thing meant death not more than a day before. Soon, the hateful flies would begin to cluster about the corpse. I wondered who the man was. Surely no one I had seen on this trip. It must have been one of the old-timers absent on a long roving commission, who had come to this special region independently of Anderson's survey. There he lay, past all trouble, and with the rays of the great crystal streaming out from between his stiffened fingers.
Okay, it seems to me here that the crystal and wall structure was bait to bring the crystal hunters here, but instead of going to get help, he decides to just go straight for the crystal, taking it from the dead man, and then turns to leave. However, curiosity got the better of him, and he decides to check it out further, going back into the structure that he had previously exited. After exploring the structure for quite some time, he finds that he has become lost. He tries using many different methods to help leave a path or some form of marks on the way to help him escape what he now knows is an invisible maze. The mud underfoot only holds his footprints for a few moments, so he can't follow them back. And though he tries to smear the mud on the walls, it won't hold and just slips right off. He tries in vain to scratch the walls with his knife, but it doesn't leave even a trace.
I now realized plainly that I was lost. The complications of this building were too much for offhand solution, and I would probably have to do some careful checking before I could hope to emerge. Still, I was eager to get to dry ground before total darkness set in. Hence I returned once more to the center and began a rather aimless series of trial and errors, making notes by the light of my electric lamp. When I used this device, I noticed with interest that it produced no reflection, not even the faintest glistening, in the transparent walls around me. I was, however, prepared for this, since the sun had at no time formed a gleaming image in the strange material.
After a few tough days in the maze, while he tries in vain to find a way out, with lots of tedious descriptions of his plight, and I mean pages of, oh, I went this way, oh, I went that way, I'm going to spare you the details. Some lizard people emerge from the woods to watch him, and we finally get a good and interesting description of them.
The resemblance to reptiles was perceptible, though I knew it was only an apparent one, since these things have no point of contact with terrestrial life. When they drew nearer, they seemed less truly reptilian, only the flat head and the green, slimy, frog-like skin carrying out the idea. They walked erect on their odd, thick stumps, and their suction discs made curious noises in the mud. These were average specimens, about 7 feet in height, and with 4 long, ropey, pectoral tentacles. The motions of these tentacles, if the theories of Fogg, Ekberg, and Janot are right, which I formerly doubted but am now more ready to believe, indicated that these things were in an animated conversation.
The protagonist now realizes that the body of the person in the maze, who he thinks might be this guy named Dwight, was likely in the same position he is in now, and suffered the same fate until taking off his oxygen mask to end his life, rather than starving or being killed by the aliens. This sets him off in a total panic, and he starts running through the maze until inevitably he hits a wall hard enough to bloody his face and falls down. The fall kind of clears up his panic, and he's able to form coherent thought again.
The fall sobered me a bit, so that when I slowly struggled to my feet, I could notice things and exercise my reason. The circling watchers were swaying their tentacles in an odd, irregular way, suggestive of sly, alien laughter, and I shook my fists savagely at them as I rose. My gestures seemed to increase their hideous mirth, a few of them clumsy imitating it with their greenish upper limbs. Shamed into sense, I tried to collect my faculties and take stock of the situation.
This situation goes on for a while, a few times thinking he has beaten the maze, only to find that he has not. He runs out of water and food tablets. As night falls, the aliens are out there with glow torches watching him. Worse still, he starts to run out of oxygen and has to do everything in his power to conserve energy and not exert himself. He takes to crawling through the maze from exhaustion and desperation to find the way out. So picture this. In this scenario, we have a large invisible maze with a rotting corpse in the center, a man on the verge of dying crawling through the chambers, and groups of tentacled lizardmen watching from outside of the outer walls, laughing at them with their tentacles. I love it. I think it's great. Once again, he thinks he has managed to beat the maze by making his way back to the corpse. The corpse was close to the actual exit, or so the narrator thinks. But when he gets there, there is a wall between him and it. He considers suicide, but decides instead to make a record of these events on paper and hopefully have enough strength to throw it over the maze wall so another person from Terra Nova will not enter the labyrinth.
If it does survive to be read, I hope it may do more than merely warn men of this trap. I hope it may teach our race to let those shining crystals stay where they are. They belong to Venus alone. Our planet does not truly need them, and I believe we have violated some obscure and mysterious law. Some law buried deep in the arcana of the cosmos, in our attempts to take them. Who can tell what dark, potent, and widespread forces spur on these reptilian things who guard their treasure so strangely? Dwight and I have paid, as others have paid and will pay. But it may be that these scattered deaths are only the prelude of greater horrors to come. Let us leave to Venus that which belongs only to Venus.
This last passage shows that the events of the past few days have changed the character's mind about this entire situation, and he no longer feels the same way towards the beings of this planet, even though he's in this terrible situation. He isn't able to gain the strength to throw the record over the wall in the end, so he just lays in the mud and continues to write. His last few entries are as follows.
I am growing numb and cannot write much more. Things whirl around me, yet I do not lose consciousness. Can I throw this over the wall? The crystal glows so, yet the twilight is deepening. Dark, very weak. They are still laughing and leaping around the doorway and have started those hellish glow torches. Are they going away? I dreamed I heard a sound. Light in the sky.
So he dies, of course. And the last entry is from another from his company that finds his body. They find the trap, they study it, and they dynamite the maze after drilling holes in it and then throwing the dynamite in, where they take the crystal and then find the record. After reading the record, they decide they're going to take Stanfield's advice, but not the advice from the end of his life, the advice from the beginning. They're going to bring enough troops to just wipe out the native species altogether.
In considering the plan of the labyrinth, one is impressed not only with the irony of Dwight's fate, but with that of Steinfield's as well. When trying to reach the second body from the skeleton, we could find no access on the right, but Markheim found a doorway from the first inner space some 15 feet past Dwight and 4 or 5 past Stanfield. Beyond this was a long hall which we did not explore till later, but on the right-hand side of the hall was another doorway leading directly to the body. Stanfield could have easily reached the outside entrance by walking 22 or 23 feet if he had found the opening which lay directly behind him, an opening which he overlooked in his exhaustion and despair.
So both men died very close to an exit out of this maze, and even though Steinfield knew that Dwight had died close to an exit, he himself had also died close to another exit, and the people in his company chose to kill the entire alien race, so this didn't have a happy ending at all. And honestly, this story is kind of annoying to read because there are pages and pages of him just lost in the maze, and I think it really could have been shortened down. However, I think the atmosphere and the ending is well worth it. I'll put a link to the full story if you want to read it yourself, though bear in mind that you may have to just skim read some parts because I didn't even include a lot of it in here. Thanks for listening. I hope you liked this one, and I'll have more for you soon.